Hi, I'm Stephen with AlbertaUrbanGarden.ca. During last month's perennial workshop and the preceding video on how to plan for a perennial garden, I got a lot of questions about growing perennials in containers. During today's Urban Gardening Series video, I'm going to touch on how I grow my perennials in containers and how you can too. Perennials are crops that you plant once and produce for more than 2 years, and they're a great one-time investment for an urban orchard. Growing perennials in containers is not difficult, and it allows those with limited space, such as a patio, deck, or balcony, to enjoy their produce. Many of your favorite perennials do quite well in containers. Currently, I have goji berries over by the deck, a couple of varieties of figs, blueberries, and grapes, and I've had strawberries and honeyberries in the past. One of the limitations of growing perennials in containers in cooler zones like my own is the fact that larger perennials such as trees don't necessarily do as well as their southern counterparts. Most often, you'll have to actually bury the pot of the tree in the winter to protect the roots from freezing too much. If you're growing on a patio, balcony, or deck, you may not have the opportunity to do so. I would rather focus my efforts on the two general categories of food-producing perennials that have done well for me in the past. That's bushes and vines. Container size is important for perennials. The soil you add in the container must contain enough nutrients and water for the plant to grow well. Perennials also usually have more extensive rooting systems than their annual counterparts. For this reason, I usually select 10 to 15 gallon or 37 to 56 liter containers. I really like the containers that are used for trees as they are large and durable. I usually salvage these from friends whom are planting trees, or I find them on local buy and sell websites for free. When selecting a pot, make sure it has great drainage. If water is allowed to sit in the bottom of the pot, it can cause unwanted disease issues. Self-watering containers, however, are great and don't usually cause the disease or rot issues. These are containers like this earth box that have a separate reservoir for water below. A self-watering container like this can let you get away with a smaller overall container size if you wish. Fabric pots are an option that is generally easier to manage and move. They can even be made from 100% recycled materials. It is worth noting that once you fill your container, the soil and the perennial are quite heavy. I don't have issues hauling them around my yard, but you may want to consider the weight. The makeup of the soil is very specific. For instance, blueberries prefer a more acidic soil and will need a soil mix that has a lower overall pH. Generally speaking, I mix 3 parts compost with 1 part commercial potting mix. The potting mix will help hold the water, but the larger portion of compost is very important. The compost will hold the nutrients the perennial needs over the long term to do well year over year. What I look for in a soil mixture is a mixture that holds water but is not sopping wet when you pick it up. An easy way to figure this out is to make a small batch of your potting mix and douse it with water. Wait a few minutes and pick up a handful. If it drips before you squeeze it, it needs more drainage. If when you pick it up it does not drip until you squeeze it, generally this is a well-drained soil and will retain moisture the plant needs. The next most common question that I get about the perennials that I grow in containers is their long-term nutrient needs. While initially the compost in the soil will provide more than enough nutrients through 1 or 2 growing seasons, eventually, if you don't add any more nutrients, the plants will run out. For this, I rely on worm castings. They are packed with plant-available nutrients, plant growth hormones, humus that helps to hold water, and finally, they usually have live worms or eggs in the castings. After I add the worm castings, which can be done at any time on top of the soil, I treat the soil just like I would the surface of my garden. I mulch with leaves, used coffee grounds, tea leaves, and eggshells. This provides the worms a source of food so that they can continue to add nutrients to the soil for the plant. If you don't have access to vermicompost, native worms you find around your yard can do the same work with mulch. At this point, I'm usually asked if compost teas can supplement the nutrient requirements of your potted perennials. I won't address compost teas in this video. However, at the end of this video, I will put links to the Testing Garden Assumption series where I address this. Make sure to watch both parts 1 and 2. They're back to back in the playlist. Every 3 to 5 years, your potted perennials may become root bound. If you're growing within a hard surfaced container, the roots will reach the end and continue to circle around. Root bound plants will eventually drop in production and invite disease issues. At this time, what I usually do is I pull it out of the container, I look to see if they're root bound, and if they are, I remove about 2/3 of the soil and replace it with fresh potting mix and compost. This will help create a nice environment for the plant to continue to produce well for you. The best time to do this is early spring, before the plant buds out. Doing it then will reduce the impact it has on the plant, and when the plant buds out, it is actively growing and the new root system will extend into the compost. You won't sacrifice too much production of that year's crops either. If you are growing potted perennials that are not quite hardy to your zone, such as this fig, you'll want to find a nice protected location for the winter. I let the plants go through some light frosts in the fall to force them to go dormant. I then move them into my attached unheated garage. It is important to keep them above the temperature that will permanently damage them, but not so warm as they try to grow again. For things like figs and this less hardy pixie grape, they can survive temperatures as low as 10 degrees Celsius or 14 Fahrenheit. My garage does not drop below the freezing mark very often, and when it does not drop below minus 10 Celsius or 14 Fahrenheit. Once the plants are in the garage and dormant, I try to keep the light off them by putting a sheet over them, again helping to keep them in dormancy until spring. During the winter, they don't need much water unless you live in a very dry climate like I do, at which case I give them about a liter or two of water every month or so. Come spring, I keep my eyes on the temperatures as they warm. Once the plants begin to bud, or daytime temperatures are safely above the freezing mark, I'll bring them out onto my driveway during the day, returning them at night to the garage. I do this until the last frost has passed, at which point I can move them directly into my garden, as they do not require hardening off. You can bring your perennials into the house during the winter and let them grow. However, I generally try to avoid this for two reasons. The first reason is most hardy perennials do require a dormancy or cold time as a part of their natural life cycle. And the second and more important reason is pests. Pests that are controlled by their predators out of my garden may hitch a ride, coming inside, and then they can do a lot of damage to my indoor grow up if left unchecked. If you have potted perennials that are hardy to your zone or lower, you can simply leave them out during the winter. I don't do much with these. I try to keep them out of as much direct sunlight as I can during the winter. If there's enough snow, I simply toss it over the container and the plant, helping to keep it dormant. This is generally how I grow perennials in containers here in Zone 3. If you have any questions about growing perennials in containers, please let me know. If you would like to learn how you can grow more food at home, check out the link to the Urban Gardening Series playlist on screen now, and make sure to subscribe to catch all future episodes in this series.